La 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 la.
Boom! Detective Michael's card!
What is the most exciting thing that can happen on TV or in movies or in real life? Somebody has a gun. That's why I always start with a gun, because you can't top it. You just can't.
Hey folks, so I found this article from 2013 about the rules of improv comedy, and I was reading through it and I couldn't help but think about how all of these rules kind of directly apply to improvisational music and bluegrass specifically. It's actually wild. I don't understand why people haven't already talked about this connection, and I mean, if they have, I haven't heard about it because I've never heard these improv commandments talked about in terms of music. So for this video, I'm going to break down Tina Fey's 4 rules of improv comedy and how they relate back to bluegrass. Keep an open mind. You can bring these rules back to band practice for practicing, well, I mean, your set and your stage presence too. I promise you won't regret it. So Tina Fey's first rule of improv is to always agree. Here's an example from another article. If someone pulls out a gun in an improv comedy scene, you don't want to say, "That's not a gun, that's a toy," because that would be disagreeing with what the first person said. Instead, we want to say yes to every suggestion. A better comeback might have been something like, "A gun? Isn't that the one I got you for Christmas?" This doesn't deny the other actor's universe, and that's huge. You don't really want to start an argument about imaginary things on stage. In music, we have the exact same concept, because when someone's leading a song or part of a song, you are in a supporting role. In other words, a role that says yes and agrees with the other people on stage. So that means in a circumstance where someone plays a solo that's more bluesy, you could play chords that are more bluesy. When someone gets quiet, you can get quiet. And when someone plays straight ahead bluegrass, you can play straight ahead bluegrass. As guitar players, so much of our role is already a supporting role, so it's important to keep this yes mentality in mind when you're playing with other people. Good bands that tackle different feels, grooves, different types of bluegrass, they back each other up on a case-by-case basis. They don't just have one kind of strum or boom chuck that happens all the time, and that is a huge failing of guitar players. The concept goes further though. This could also apply to taking a break after another person. If the first person plays a certain style of break, then you can work off that kind of break. For instance, if the first break was syncopated, syncopation can be your jumping off point. If the first break was full of 16th notes, then that can be your jumping off point. Obviously, these scenarios that you can get yourself into can be easier or harder to tackle based on your skill level, but that shouldn't stop you from attempting. And I have to say it, please keep this mindset at jams. So someone kicked off Old Home Place as a ballad or something weird. Don't make it your life mission to speed up the song before it ends. Say yes to the interpretation and play the song to the best of your ability. You want to play to that situation. I was at a jam where someone called Columbus Stockade Blues, and they called the minor version. And there was a stubborn player there who played the major chords until the song ended, and the song ended prematurely, mind you, just because he didn't like the song in minor. So because he didn't like the minor interpretation, he was gonna ruin it for everyone by playing the major chords the whole time. This was an intentional move on his part. He did not say yes to the situation. Now tell me honestly, does that sound like fun to you? No. Obviously not. Say yes instead. Don't railroad other people's choices and everything will be better. So you're probably thinking like, Marcel's gone off the deep end. Like now I'm going to say like, say yes to washboard players in traditional bluegrass and like wear water wings on stage. That's not what I'm getting at. I'm getting that you should at least work with the musicians around you, right? You get put in these situations and you should make the most of them rather than getting pouty, because that's not fun. All right, here's Tina Fey's second rule of improv. Always add to the situation at hand after agreeing. If an improv actor says, "I brought a rope, we can use it to climb out the window," you wouldn't want to just say, "Okay." Instead, add something. "All right, but this rope's only 2 feet long." Or maybe, "Why is this rope covered in butter?" Or even something super silly like, "I'm allergic to ropes, let me jump on your back and you can carry us both down." Any scene has to develop, and a lot of times just agreeing with the other person isn't enough to actually push the scene forwards. In music, this is one of our most powerful tools. The concept of saying yes and is why fiddle tunes work in performance. A lot of times we have that first break that states the melody, right? And then our second agrees and adds something. The next in line agrees with the person beforehand and once again adds something of their own. So on and so forth until something truly unique is happening in this circle. One of my favorite examples of this happening is Chris Eldridge and Julian Lodge playing Whiskey Before Breakfast on I think it's their first album that they did together. They drift so far away from the melody, you can't even hear Whiskey Before Breakfast. And then all of a sudden, bam, they're right back in the melody for the ending of the tune. The final yes and statement being yes to all of this improvisation, but what about that original melody? This is why sometimes at jams you can hear tunes genuinely develop and something special is happening and people are playing off each other, or at jams you can hear just everyone playing a break for themselves when it's their turn. That has no relation to the group. Fiddle tunes without yes and just feel like everyone's ego going, I can do that better. So if you're in one of those special jams where something really cool is happening, don't ignore the person before you. Keep the feeling going. Tina Fey's third rule of improv is make statements. The idea being that, to move that scene forward, your and moment where you get to say something big, you should really say something big. In a bank robbery improv scene, maybe an actor could say, now we just need to find a way to get inside. Now the other actor could say yes or yes and, but both of those might not move the story forward. For instance, yes would sound like, yeah, we need to get inside. And yes and could just sound like, yeah, let's get inside and steal the money. Nothing is happening. So we need to make these big statements, right? You might want to say something like, hey, what do you know? The door's unlocked. Or, listen, this is my first robbery and I'm really nervous, but singing always calms me down. Can we sing a little song before we get going? And then I'll be good. Then we can do the robbery thing. Someone has to be making the moves to progress that action forward. In music, this can really just boil down to make bold choices. Being creative pays off. Being a clone or playing it too safe too often can really make you predictable or boring. Audiences like to be surprised, so surprise them. We're talking about dangerous no choice. We're talking about rule breaking and genre bending. It's funny, but a lot of the things that surprise audiences are things that we tend to crucify players for doing. Take something like the inclusion of jazz licks into bluegrass. Lots of players think that this hurts bluegrass, but yet we love players that do it. Modern day Grant Gordy or, the classics like Tony Rice and Grisman. So what gives? What's going on here? Why is that true? I think the majority of it boils down to the other improv rules, actually. Those players had bands that were saying yes or yes and. When there's a player who includes a little bit of another genre in their playing, be it jazz or country or whatever, and all the other people in the band say no, then that's awkward. It means there's either some kind of internal band struggle or people aren't really willing to play that support role, which is a problem. So remember, unless there's other internal struggles going on, you want to say yes to your friends and bandmates' bold statements. The other important thing is that your bold statements can't be non sequiturs. So from the, improviser's perspective, they can't be completely unrelatable. They have to come from a place of knowledge and respect. To reference improv comedy again, right, they have to move the story forward and not just be totally out of left field disrupting the scene. To say it shortly, be intentional with the statements you make, no matter how bold or strange they may be. Intentional is the key word there. And possibly more importantly, surround yourself with musicians who are willing to say yes. That's how things progress. People saying yes. Tina Fey's fourth and last rule is that there are no mistakes, only opportunities. In the case of improv, how about let's just say that this boils down to roll with it. Don't give up when something bizarre happens. That's your cue to persevere and make something of it. Sometimes the impressive part of an improv scene is that the wheels don't fall all the way off, only part way. In fact, lots of the most memorable improv comedy in my mind are those scenes where the wheels came close to falling off. The scenes that had mistakes, in other words. Back to music. Improvisational music is the exact same way. It's glorified damage control. And normally when this talk happens, it's about making your mistakes seem intentional. You get this advice that says, it's a mistake if you play it once, but it's innovative if you play it twice. I think that's trash advice. Advice like that is people's egos talking. Advice like that is built to hide that you made a mistake, and that's why this rule is important. We don't want to do that. Mistakes are opportunities, so they shouldn't be swept under the rug. They should be embraced. And I also don't mean it in that kind of woo-woo, all mistakes are special gifts in disguise kind of way. I don't mean that either. What I mean is that mistakes are humanizing. And some of it has to do with people liking underdogs. But even more than that, I think people like idols that are human. It's not a mistake that halfway through every Jackie Chan fight scene, the bad guy gets the upper hand for a second. It only makes you cheer harder when Jackie Chan uses some kind of improvised weapon in his environment to once again save the day. So understand that fumbles and mistakes can be part of a story's arc. It really doesn't have to be perfect for it tell a story and even be impressive. There's lots of live bluegrass breaks that I could point to as evidence for this fact. And one of them is like Tony Rice has a fumble in the All-Star Jam during Freeborn Man, I think it is. He kind of messes up a passage and then he jumps back on that horse and he does it again. Just search for that on YouTube if you haven't seen it and listen closely and you'll see him, fumble just for a second. It doesn't hurt anything. And just because I mentioned them earlier, Chris Eldridge and Julian Lodge, they do the live version of Mean Mother Blues that they do for Music City Roots. Chris has a fumble in the middle of one of his solos, and then they both mess up the ending. The performance is still great. That's actually my favorite version of that song. Like, I'd rather watch that video of the performance than listen to the one on the album. The mistakes were opportunities for them to come back that much harder and prove themselves as valuable players. And personally, I know some of the best shows I've ever played had huge, glaring errors in them, and they make you get back on and just prove yourself that much harder. I played a show yesterday that I made mistakes in, because you always make mistakes. And I had solos after ones that had big mistakes in it that might have been the best breaks of the night. Rather than making the mistake and choosing to beat myself up about it, I took it as my moment to go that much harder on the next one. Anyway, enough of that. Hopefully that was fun for you. This was such a weird idea, but as soon as I read the article, I just couldn't stop making the connections in my mind, and I just wanted to talk at a camera about it for a little bit. Anyway, if you like taking a lesson from the biggest, baddest Billy Goat in the barnyard, there's a couple things you can do for me. Of course, you can like this video, you can subscribe to this channel, and you can leave a comment down there. Let me know what I did right, what I did wrong, and what videos you want to see in the future. You can also find me on those big 3 social media platforms, and you can find an account on Instagram that I help run called Jazz and Grass, which is a new lick every single weekday. That's either bluegrass or jazz, alternating back and forth. I run that with my friend Lyman Lipke, and we do a podcast on Sundays. Also, you can check out my website, lessonswithmarcel.com. There's a bunch of free stuff on there, and that's also where you can sign up for Skype lessons if you're interested. I think that's it. I think I got everything, so I'll see you next week.